The exit interview took place in a small, windowless meeting room that smelled of stale printer toner, artificial lemon cleaner, and the quiet decay of corporate ambition. Gregory Finch, the director of product engineering, sat across the laminate wood table, his posture radiating a smug, unearned satisfaction. He slid a crisp white envelope across the table. It moved slowly, catching on the slightly warped edge of the wood grain. Clara Vance stared at the envelope, then raised her eyes to meet Gregory's steady gaze. "You are lucky we are even paying out your accumulated paid time off," Gregory said, his voice carrying a thin, patronizing edge. He leaned back in his mesh chair, which creaked loudly under his weight. He smiled, a wide, self-satisfied grin that revealed a small green fleck of spinach from his lunch wedged between his teeth. "Just remember, Clara, we control your career references in this industry. It is a very small world and people talk. You do not want to find yourself blacklisted." Clara did not flinch. She did not blink. She simply watched him, her expression a mask of absolute, freezing neutrality. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, vibrating drone, casting a harsh, clinical glare over the room. Gregory expected tears, or perhaps a panicked plea for mercy. He wanted her to beg him not to poison her professional reputation. Instead, she reached out, took the envelope, and folded it neatly into her notebook. "Thank you, Gregory," Clara said, her voice flat and even. "I appreciate the clarity." Gregory's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read her complete lack of emotion. "It is just business, Clara. Nothing personal," he added, invoking the classic corporate shield used by people who make decisions based entirely on personal insecurity and ego. To Gregory, Clara was a line item that had grown too independent. To Clara, Gregory was a manager who had not written a line of functional code in a decade, a man who survived by hijacking the achievements of his subordinates and ending every status meeting with the empty phrase, "Let us make it happen." This was not a standard layoff. Clara had been pushed out because she had built something Gregory could not comprehend, and that terrified him. For 18 months, Clara had worked as the senior infrastructure architect at Nileflow. During that time, she had watched the company's platform buckle under the weight of rapid user acquisition. When their expensive third-party content delivery network failed during a critical holiday traffic spike, threatening to bankrupt the startup, Clara had stepped in. She spent dozens of weekends at her kitchen table, working on her personal laptop, completely separate from the company's servers and networks. There, she designed and coded a custom, highly advanced routing and load balancing engine. She named it the G3 protocol. It was a masterpiece of software engineering, capable of dynamically redirecting massive volatile traffic spikes through a secondary cache layer. When she implemented it, the platform's latency dropped by 37%, and system crashes ceased entirely. Nileflow's board celebrated the stability, and Gregory took the credit, presenting the results to the founders while Clara sat in the back row of the presentation room, ignored. Clara stood up and gathered her notebook. Gregory offered a dry, performative laugh. "No hard feelings, right?" "None at all," Clara replied. She looked him square in the eye, her voice devoid of anger. She turned and walked out of the room. The engineering floor was quiet as she walked back to her desk. The hum of keyboards and clicking mouse buttons felt strangely muffled, like the silence that follows a loud explosion. Most of her colleagues did not look up from their screens. Some pretended to be deeply engrossed in empty email drafts. A few looked at her with a mixture of guilt and relief. They were glad it was her and not them. Only Toby Miller, the 22-year-old intern, who had only been with the company for 3 months, stood up. He walked over to the kitchen island near her desk, holding a granola bar like a shield, and gave her a slow, firm nod of respect. Clara returned the nod, her face softening for a brief second. Toby was the only person in the building who still acted like a human being. Clara packed her belongings quickly. She had always traveled light. A ceramic coffee mug, a single black notebook filled with her handwritten architectural sketches, and a custom fountain pen she had purchased herself. She left the heavy glass trophy they had given her for Employee of the Year. Let it gather dust on the empty desk. Before shutting down her corporate computer for the last time, Clara executed 2 pre-planned steps. First, she drafted a polite, formal email to the legal department. Dear legal team, she wrote, for the purpose of compliance and future professional alignment, I request a formal, written breakdown of my intellectual property contributions to the core infrastructure modules over the past 18 months. She listed the specific codebases, including the G3 routing engine. She knew the corporate lawyers would file it away without understanding the gravity of the situation. It was a legal marker, a paper trail indicating she was asserting her authorship. Second, she opened her personal laptop and connected to her phone's cellular hotspot. She sent a clean, sanitized schematic of the G3 architecture to her private email address. The schematic contained no proprietary code, no company branding, and no trade secrets. It was simply the mathematical logic and routing flow diagrams she had designed at home. She then wiped her local machine, formatted the drive as required by company exit policy, and dropped her plastic security badge into the metal tray at the reception desk. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, her name had already been deleted from the company's Slack channel. She watched the application load error spin on her phone. They were fast when it came to erasing people, but they had no idea they had just pulled the load-bearing pillar out of their own building. The days following Clara's departure from Nileflow were quiet, filled with a peaceful stillness she had not experienced in years. She did not post a fake glowing farewell message on her professional social media accounts. She did not reach out to her old colleagues to gossip. Instead, she woke up early, drank her coffee on the balcony, and listened to the silence of a morning uninterrupted by urgent alerts. After a week of rest, Clara registered a small, independent consulting firm. She named it Advanced Systems Engineering. She did not build a flashy website, nor did she hire marketing agents. She simply sent a brief, polite email to 3 former industry colleagues who had left the corporate race years prior to start their own technical ventures. Within 48 hours, she had her first client, a mid-sized logistics startup in Austin that was struggling with database synchronization delays. Clara analyzed their architecture, identified the bottlenecks, and resolved the issue in 3 days. The database synchronization issue was a classic race condition where write locks were blocking reads during high transactional spikes. Clara resolved this by decoupling the transactions using an asynchronous event queue pattern, ensuring that data updates were processed in the background without locking the user interface. She worked from her dining table, wearing comfortable clothes, free from the endless cycle of sprint planning, daily stand-up meetings, and performance reviews. She was paid twice her previous hourly rate, and the client was thrilled. She realized she had not lost her passion for engineering. She had simply lost her tolerance for corporate theater. She spent her afternoons reading technical papers and refining her own architectural frameworks. For the first time in a decade, she felt like an architect rather than a firefighter, enjoying the intellectual satisfaction of solving complex problems without the constant pressure of arbitrary management deadlines. Meanwhile, back at the Nileflow headquarters, the cracks were beginning to show. Without Clara to maintain the G3 routing engine, the system was starting to drift. Software systems are not static. They require constant tuning to adjust to shifting traffic patterns and database updates. A week after Clara left, the engineering team pushed a minor database update. Under normal circumstances, the G3 protocol would have dynamically adjusted the routing paths to bypass the temporary database lock. But the database update slightly altered the query latency, and the G3 protocol, lacking Clara's manual calibration, began to misinterpret the signal. The platform experienced its first major slowdown on a Tuesday afternoon. Users trying to log in were met with loading wheels that spun indefinitely. On public forums like Reddit and Hacker News, threads began to appear. "Is Nileflow down for anyone else?" one user asked. Within hours, the thread had dozens of replies from frustrated clients complaining about timed-out sessions and lost data. Several large corporate clients threatened to cancel their contracts if the service issues were not resolved within 48 hours. Inside the office, Julian Ross, a mid-level developer who had been assigned to oversee Clara's systems, was in a state of panic. Julian was a competent coder, but he had never been trained on infrastructure architecture. He spent hours staring at the G3 codebase, trying to decipher the complex routing loops Clara had written. The code was clean, but the underlying logic was highly mathematical, relying on custom network protocols she had designed to handle high-volume traffic. "Just fix it, Julian," Gregory Finch had told him during an emergency meeting, his voice tense as he paced in front of the whiteboard. "It is just code. We paid her to write it, so it belongs to us. Find the bug and patch it." But there was no simple bug. The system was failing because the team did not understand how the cache layer interacted with the routing protocols. Julian tried to apply a standard software patch, but the patch only succeeded in masking the latency, causing the system to consume twice as much memory. The database began to overheat, and the weekly release cycle slipped to bi-weekly as the team focused entirely on firefighting. The remaining developers were working 80-hour weeks, their morale plummeting as they realized they were chasing ghosts in a code base they did not understand. Clara watched the degradation from a distance. She did not actively monitor their systems, but she could see the public complaints and the increasing latency metrics on public monitoring sites. She knew exactly what was happening. They were trying to run a high-performance racing engine with regular fuel and no mechanic. She knew that the G3 protocol was a temporary bridge she had built to save the company during a crisis. It was never meant to run indefinitely without supervision. She had told Gregory this 6 months ago during a quarterly planning session, explaining that they needed to allocate engineering resources to rebuild the database layer to support the routing engine. Gregory had dismissed her concerns, saying, "If it is not broken today, we are not spending budget on it." Now it was breaking, and the people who had claimed they controlled her career references had no idea how to stop the slow, steady collapse of the infrastructure she had left behind. Clara turned back to her own work, writing clean, elegant code for her new clients, knowing that the laws of software engineering, much like the laws of physics, do not care about corporate titles or management threats. 6 weeks after Clara's departure, Nileflow issued a press release that sent a wave of excitement through the company's remaining staff. The announcement was written in the typical, bloated language of corporate public relations, filled with phrases like strategic alignment and future-proofing our digital infrastructure. Strip away the jargon, and the message was simple. Nileflow was in advanced talks to be acquired by Cole Technologies, a major enterprise cloud solutions provider, in a transaction valued at $10 million. For the founders and directors, the acquisition was the ultimate payday. Gregory Finch was already talking about his impending promotion and the stock options that would vest upon the closing of the deal. He spent his days presenting polished slide decks to the transition team from Cole Technologies, painting a picture of a flawless, highly scalable platform that was ready for immediate integration. But behind the scenes, the engineering department was in chaos. Cole Technologies was known for its rigorous technical due diligence. They did not just look at financial spreadsheets. They sent their top engineers to review the target company's repositories, code quality, and system architecture. They wanted to ensure that the technology they were buying was sustainable and legally sound. At 2:13 in the morning, Clara's phone vibrated on her nightstand. She reached for it, the bright screen illuminating her dark bedroom. It was a text message from Julian Ross. "Clara, I am sorry to bother you," the message read, "but the system is falling apart. Cole Technologies is running synthetic load tests on the staging environment tomorrow afternoon, and the routing layer keeps throwing memory allocation errors. Gregory is threatening to fire me if the tests fail. Do you remember how the cache eviction policy was configured? The server keeps dropping connection handshakes, and we are seeing thread pools exhaust themselves in minutes. Any guidance would save my life." Clara looked at the message. She felt a brief flash of sympathy for Julian, who was caught in the middle of a conflict he had not created, but she also knew that helping them would only enable Gregory's toxic behavior. She did not reply. She set the phone face down on the table. 2 minutes later, at 2:15, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unfamiliar number with a San Francisco area code. "Clara, this is Damian Cole," the message read. "I am leading the technical due diligence for the Nileflow acquisition. I was looking through the core repository history, and I noticed your name disappears from the commits 6 weeks ago. Did you leave the company voluntarily, or were you pushed out? The current team is struggling to explain the custom routing architecture, and we are seeing significant anomalies in the load balancing logic. Clara sat up in bed, her heart rate increasing slightly. She remembered Damien. 5 years ago, she had volunteered to speak at a systems engineering conference he hosted. Her presentation slides had failed to load due to a compatibility issue, but instead of panicking, she had stood in front of the audience of 200 senior engineers and spent 45 minutes live debugging a massive API collapse on a terminal screen. Damien had been highly impressed, pulling her aside afterward to offer her a job. She had declined at the time, wanting to remain in her current role, but they had kept in touch. At 2:16 in the morning, Clara typed a simple reply. Does it matter? Damien's response was almost immediate. It matters if the person who wrote the only stable part of the platform is no longer there to explain why the rest of it is held together with digital tape. We run the load tests tomorrow. If you have time, I would like to call you afterward. We want to understand what we are buying, and right now, the engineering team here is raising red flags about the intellectual property ownership of the routing modules. Clara did not reply. She closed her eyes and went back to sleep, sleeping more soundly than she had in months. The next morning, the Whisper network among her former colleagues was highly active. Clara received 3 separate emails from engineers asking vague, coded questions about the G3 routing module's legal status and configuration. One developer wanted to know if she had signed the standard patent assignment for the custom load balancing algorithm. Clara smiled. She knew exactly what they were trying to find. When she was hired, she had signed the standard employment contract, which included a clause assigning all inventions created in the scope of employment to Nileflow. However, Clara had been very careful. She had designed the G3 protocol entirely at home, on her own laptop, during weekends, and without utilizing any company resources or trade secrets. Under California Labor Code Section 2870, such inventions cannot be claimed by the employer. In addition, Clara had never signed a specific project-level intellectual property assignment for the G3 protocol, meaning she legally retained the copyright under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. She had sent the formal request to the legal department on her last day to ensure there was a clear record of her claiming authorship. The lawyers had ignored it, but now, with a $10 million acquisition on the line, that ignored email was about to become a devastating legal obstacle. The boardroom at the Nileflow headquarters was filled with tension. The air conditioning hummed, but it did little to cool the room. Gregory Finch stood at the front of the room, clicking through a slide deck that highlighted the platform's user growth. At the long conference table sat the executives from Cole Technologies, including their CEO, Harrison Cole, and his brother Damien Cole, the lead engineer. Gregory clicked to slide 17, titled Engineering Team and Departures. As you can see, Gregory said, his voice carrying a nervous cheerfulness, we have optimized our engineering team over the past quarter, streamlining our operations. All core systems have been fully documented, and the transition of ownership to our current engineering staff has been completed without issue. Damien Cole looked up from his screen. He did not look at the slide, he looked directly at Gregory. Let us stop there, Damien said, his voice quiet but commanding. He closed his laptop with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. I have a question about the G3 routing module. The documentation says it is a collaborative legacy asset. But when we analyzed the commit history, we found that 92% of the codebase was written by one person, Clara Vance, and her name is listed here under departures. Gregory's smile froze. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight. Ah, yes, Clara. She was a senior engineer. We decided to transition her out as part of our restructuring. Her departure did not impact our operations. The system has been running perfectly. It ran perfectly until we initiated the synthetic load test this morning, Damien countered. The moment we simulated peak holiday traffic, the routing layer threw consecutive memory leaks and the system began to drop sessions. When we asked your CTO to explain the fallback logic, he could not answer. When we asked your lead developers, they told us they were not allowed to touch that module because they did not understand the custom protocol. If you cannot run the core engine under load, what exactly are we buying? The Nileflow CTO, who was sitting next to Gregory, turned a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Gregory with a pleading expression, hoping the director would rescue him from the technical interrogation. In addition, Damien continued, his eyes locking onto Gregory, our legal team reviewed the intellectual property declarations. We found a formal inquiry from Clara Vance dated 6 weeks ago, requesting confirmation of her authorship of the G3 protocol. We also reviewed her employment record. She wrote the entire protocol on weekends on her personal laptop and without using Nileflow equipment or facilities. Harrison Cole, the CEO of Cole Technologies, leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Our general counsel has reviewed the facts. Under California Labor Code, Section 2870, and Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, Nileflow does not hold the exclusive rights to the core routing infrastructure of this platform. Clara Vance legally owns the copyright to the software that keeps your company online. You have no valid legal assignment for the very core of your technology. Gregory felt the room begin to spin. He looked around the table, but the other Nileflow executives were looking down at their notes, avoiding his eyes. That is impossible, Gregory stammered. She was an employee. We paid her salary. Everything she wrote belongs to us. Our contracts cover all work performed by staff. Not when she wrote it on her own time, on her own machine, and for a project that was outside her official job description. Harrison Cole's general counsel stated, speaking up from the end of the table. You have no signed assignment of copyright for this specific code base. If we acquire Nileflow, we are acquiring a massive legal liability. We would be open to a copyright infringement lawsuit from the true owner of the technology the moment the deal closes. We cannot risk a $10 million acquisition on a product whose core routing engine is legally owned by a third party. We require clean title to all assets, and you do not have it. Gregory looked at the CTO, then at the CEO of Nileflow. Their faces were pale, their expressions blank. They realized the $10 million buyout was vanishing before their eyes. The dream of a massive payout was dissolving because they had chosen to treat their lead architect as expendable. We are suspending the acquisition negotiations indefinitely, Harrison Cole said, standing up. We are not purchasing a company that does not own its own engine. We suggest you resolve your intellectual property disputes before seeking another buyer. Good day. The Cole Technologies delegation gathered their laptops and walked out of the room. Damien Cole lingered at the door for a moment. He looked at Gregory, who was slumped in his chair, staring at the frozen slide on the screen. You should have known the difference between firing a name and removing a pillar, Gregory, Damien said quietly. You told her you controlled her references. It turns out she controlled your entire company. With that, Damien walked out, leaving Gregory alone in the silent, cold boardroom. 2 days after the acquisition collapsed, Clara sat in a sunlit corner room of a high-rise office building downtown. The office belonged to Cole Technologies. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, with cars moving like tiny insects along the streets below. A carafe of cold water sat on the polished conference table, but Clara had not touched it. She was looking at the term sheet that had been placed on the table. Sitting across from her were Harrison Cole and Damien Cole. We want to apologize for the circumstances that brought us here, Clara, Harrison said, his tone professional and direct. But we are very impressed by your work. The G3 routing protocol is an exceptional piece of engineering. It is clear that you built the foundation of Nileflow's stability, and we want to ensure that talent is properly rewarded and utilized within our organization. Thank you, Clara said. We have a proposal for you, Harrison continued. We want to hire you as the Vice President of Platform Engineering at Cole Technologies. The position comes with a 7-figure annual salary, significant equity options, and complete autonomy over your department. You will report directly to Damien, and you will have the budget to build your own team from scratch. We want you to help us design our next-generation enterprise infrastructure. Clara looked at the document. The financial compensation was higher than anything she had ever expected to earn, but she was more interested in the legal terms. She flipped to the second page, scanning the text with practiced efficiency. The agreement explicitly stated that Clara would grant Cole Technologies a non-exclusive, royalty-free license to use the G3 routing protocol, while she retained the sole copyright ownership of the technology under Title 17 of the United States Codes, Section 106. The contract also included a clause ensuring she would not be subject to any post-employment non-compete agreements. "And what about Nileflow?" Clara asked. "Nileflow is currently facing a severe crisis," Damien answered. "Their board of directors has placed Gregory Finch on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his management practices and the intellectual property oversight. Their CTO has resigned. Without the acquisition, and with their system continuing to experience latency issues, they will likely have to restructure or file for bankruptcy. They cannot run the platform without a license to your routing engine. In fact, their new interim management team reached out to us yesterday. They want to negotiate a licensing agreement for the G3 protocol. Under the terms of your contract with us, we will manage that negotiation, and you will receive 80% of all licensing royalties." Clara nodded slowly. She felt no joy in Nileflow's demise, but she felt a profound sense of vindication. The man who had sneered at her, claiming he controlled her career references, had destroyed his own career and the company's future through his own arrogance and ignorance. As a final detail, Clara looked up at Harrison. "I want to bring over some talent. I want a budget to hire Toby Miller, the intern at Nileflow. He has potential, and he was the only one who showed decency when I was pushed out. I want to train him as a junior infrastructure specialist under my direct guidance." "Done," Harrison said without hesitation. "You have complete hiring authority. We will make the offer to Toby today." Clara felt a profound sense of relief as she held the signed document. She was no longer just an employee in a corporate hierarchy. She was an equal partner in building the future of platform engineering. Her decisions would be respected, and her team would be protected. She took the heavy metal pen from the table, signed her name at the bottom of the term sheet, and slid it back to Harrison. "Welcome to Cole Technologies, Clara," Harrison said, shaking her hand. "I am glad to be here," Clara replied. 20 minutes later, Clara walked out of the building. The afternoon air was warm and clear, carrying the scent of summer rain. She did not check her phone for notifications. She did not feel the need to celebrate online. She walked 3 blocks to a small, quiet bakery she had discovered during her weeks of consulting. She ordered a fresh pastry and a cup of black coffee, sitting at a small table on the sidewalk. As she took a bite of the pastry, she watched the city move around her, feeling the last traces of corporate stress melt away. She was no longer a hidden gear in someone else's machine, forced to tolerate incompetent directors. She was the architect of her own path, and she had built a foundation that was designed to last for a very long time.